Hello everyone! Today we're getting into a new lesson on solving by factoring. And so last time we learned about solving when it's already in factored form, and we used what was called the zero product property, which was that if two numbers multiplied equals 0, then one of the numbers has to be 0. And so all of those examples, our equation was already factored. But now for today, we're going to learn just taking it a step back where we actually have to go ahead and factor it first and then solve it in the same way that we did in those other examples. And so the solving by factoring steps, what we're going to do is first we're going to move all terms to one side of the equation, so the equation is equal to 0. We are going to factor that side, and then we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. And so this last step is what we already did with the zero product property and when we were solving already in factored form. But now we just need to do steps 1 and 2 first. So for this lesson today, we're really going to have to remember all of our different factoring techniques that we learned in our factoring unit. And so if you recall, there were multiple ways that we can factor just depending on what we're given. But the first step is always to factor out the GCF if there is one. And then we can go to these different ways that we can factor from there. And you'll find that below these video lessons, I have links for you for your convenience, those video lessons for those different types of factoring, like difference of squares, GCF, when there's 3 terms, and factor by grouping. So you can watch those if you want. And then I also have below those a flowchart for you. It actually came from the Factoring Completely notes that we did in the factoring unit. And that kind of gives a summary of how to know which type of factoring we're going to use. So the first one is 2 terms. And if we have 2 terms, we want to check and see if it is a difference of squares. Because again, if there's a GCF, then we're going to factor out the GCF first. So for instance, if I had 2 terms, but let's say they were 5x squared plus 10x, I would see this has a GCF of 5x, and so I would divide out 5x from both and get that my factored form is 5x, x plus 2. And so this wouldn't be a difference of squares, even though it's 2 terms. So always check for that. But let's say you had 2 terms, and let's say it is a difference of squares. So let's say I had, for example, x squared minus 25. If you remember, for this, our first step is to first write this as a difference of squares. So I would have that this would be x squared minus, and then I have to figure out what number squared gets me 25. And if you recall, the easiest way to figure that out is just to take the square root of 25. You can put that in your calculator, and that's going to equal to 5. And then our pattern here that we had for difference of squares, if I have a difference of squares, I'm just going to put my x and 5 in here. And then one's going to have a plus and the other's going to have a minus. So it's the same thing in both parentheses, except one has a plus and the other's a minus. When we have 3 terms, so let's say we had something that looks like ax squared plus bx plus c, we had 2 different ways that we can factor it. So first, if a is equal to 1, then we're going to find factors of c that add to b. And then we would just put those factors into our parentheses. However, if a is greater than 1, then we need to use the AC method. Again, if you don't remember what those are, I highly encourage you to go back and rewatch those videos. And then if there's 4 terms, we're going to factor by grouping. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and get into some examples.